My name is Violetta, I am 35 years old, and for the past few years I have been serving as Deputy CEO of a respected company that specializes in sports nutrition, an area where rigor of calculation is combined with the cult of the body and the idea of overcoming oneself. And in this I have always seen a certain kinship with my own attitude to life, people, especially those who consider it their duty to interfere in other people's destinies, ask the same question with enviable regularity, as if they are reading it from some kind of broken record. Why, they say, I am still not married, as if there is certainly something disturbing in my loneliness, as if there is a hidden secret behind it, drama or dissatisfaction that I simply refuse to acknowledge. In fact, I've long since come to a quiet and firm agreement with myself. I just don't need a serious relationship, at least for now. And this decision is not the result of bitterness or disappointment, but rather the result of clarity that I have gained over time, having grown a stable confidence within myself that my life is full enough, saturated and good enough. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I have a younger brother, Amerigo, who is 28 years old, and last year he married his girlfriend, Sarah, a charming and balanced woman with whom he had been together for many years, so their marriage was more the logical conclusion of a long and lasting union than an unexpected twist of fate, and none of us I was surprised when they finally decided to officially tie the knot. I was sincerely happy for them, rejoicing in their happiness without any shadow of envy or regret, and, wanting to support them at the start of a new chapter in their lives, I gave them $15,000, an amount that cannot be called insignificant even with my salary, and which I nevertheless gave away with ease, based not on obligation, but on out of a desire to help, because Amerigo is my brother, and I really wanted them to have the opportunity to create a cozy, stable nest without starting everything from scratch in debt. The wedding itself, admittedly, was truly beautiful. Sarah looked gorgeous in her exquisite ivory dress, with delicate lace trim that accentuated her fragility, and Amerigo seemed to simply glow with happiness, unable to stop smiling. The ceremony took place in a small white church with tall stained glass windows, where our family has been going for many years, and the walls of which hold hundreds of our memories, from baptisms to Christmas, and the reception took place in a cozy hotel in the city center, where the smell of flowers, candles and champagne merged into the aroma of the holiday. Everything was going flawlessly until the very moment when the relatives began to engage in their usual, and, alas, inherent, stupidities. Violetta, when are you going to settle down? My Aunt Agatha blurted out, interrupting a decorous dessert conversation right in the middle of the reception, as if she was suddenly overcome with fear that I might slip out of the family's control. Now you're the only unmarried woman in the whole family, Aunt Beatrice added with a theatrical sigh, as if thereby accusing me of some kind of dishonor. As if I didn't know about it myself. Mom didn't stay away either, pursing her lips with that characteristic anxious energy, and added her own, it's time for you to hear the patter of little feet in your big house. Of course, I smiled and nodded, as I always do, not wanting to get into useless arguments, but inside I prayed for patience so as not to break down and tell them everything that had been hurting for a long time. These people, my family, my relatives, with whom I have been through so much, sometimes behave as if loneliness is a disease that urgently needs to be cured. I have a wonderful job, a spacious house of my own, and I am happy in my current condition, which I chose myself. What else do they want? After the wedding, Amerigo and Sarah moved into a small studio apartment owned by our parents. It's modest, but quite decent, and the main thing is that they don't pay rent, because their parents actually gave it to them for free. Mom soon asked me to help with utility bills, which meant that I had to pay my monthly electricity and gas bills. I didn't mind. Helping my family has always been a natural thing for me, but sometimes in the quiet of the evenings I wondered if they really appreciated it or took it for granted. The first months after the wedding went smoothly. Sarah seemed genuinely sweet, always polite and grateful, especially when we gathered for traditional family dinners at her parents' house. She thanked me for my help with paying the bills, asked me about my work, and there was genuine interest in these conversations. I started to think that we could really become close. I've worked hard since I was young to get to the position I currently occupy. I started working at the age of 16, went to college, and then spent 13 long, grueling, but inspiring years climbing the career ladder, going through doubts, sleepless nights, and difficult decisions. 3 years ago, I was appointed deputy CEO, a moment that I will always remember as the culmination of a long journey. My salary is good, really good, and 2 years ago, with some pride, I bought my own house. The house is spacious and cozy, with 4 bedrooms, a comfortable kitchen flooded with light, and a backyard where you can have a barbecue on weekends or just read in a hammock. I searched for him for several months, looked at dozens of options, before I found exactly the one that resonated with something warm and right inside. It is located in a good area, 10 minutes from the office. And it turned out to be the perfect combination. When I signed the papers, I felt that this was success, and that's exactly how it felt, not as a triumph, but as peace. It was my house, bought with my money, and no one could take it away from me. When I first moved in, I didn't hesitate to give my parents a spare key. They helped me with the furniture, and I thought it was a normal, natural gesture to leave them the key in case of something unexpected. After all, these are my parents, and I trusted them completely. Every Sunday, a family dinner is held at my parents' house, a tradition that goes back to my childhood with Amerigo, when we sat at the same wooden table, still with greasy fingers from breakfast, discussing school incidents. Mom still cooks stew or baked chicken, filling the house with smells that make it warm, and we still gather the same way, with plates in our hands, with discussions of the news of the week, with toasts to health and occasional bursts of laughter. Usually, these Sunday dinners were for me a source of warm, albeit noisy comfort, a reminder of something stable and unchangeable in this rapidly changing world, a place where you could put aside all work for a few hours, forget about presentations, negotiations, and meetings, and just become a daughter, sister. Part of this one is a little crazy, but her family, these were ordinary things, conversations about the weather, old acquaintances, new recipes, and sores that had begun to bother someone from the older generation, and there was a special stability in this everyday, unhurried cycle. But lately, or to be precise, starting about 3 months ago, something in this routine began to change, as if fake notes began to creep into an old, known melody, almost imperceptible at first, but each time more pronounced, sharp, annoying. Sarah, my new daughter-in-law, the one who at first seemed calm and courteous to me, suddenly began to behave differently. She rarely entered into conversation, distanced herself, and although outwardly she remained as polite and careful, hints began to slip into her voice, subtle as drops of poison dissolved in honey. It was not openly expressed in any way, but perfectly readable, short phrases, cautious remarks that did not seem to be addressed to anyone, but for some reason always concerned me. "It's so great to have a place to breathe in the house," she said one day, carefully shifting a napkin from her lap to the table, and although my name wasn't mentioned, everyone at the table perfectly understood whose house she was talking about. Or her remark the last time she cut up a chicken, "It's so unfair, single people buy huge houses and families live in tiny apartments," and then even my parents nodded in agreement, as if she had voiced some long-standing family truth that everyone was thinking about, but no one I dared to say it out loud. I pretended not to understand, put on my usual mask of polite incomprehension, lowering my eyes to my plate, but, of course, I was well aware of what she was doing. It was a subtle, strategic game, where every move, every word was thought out and directed towards a single goal, and the further I went, the more I felt the tension building inside me. I couldn't understand why, having received so much, she continued to behave as if she had been deprived, as if her rights had been violated, as if her life lacked something that belonged to me. Their apartment is small, but still free, without rent, without debts and mortgages, and at the same time, all utility costs, mind you, are covered at my expense. Many young couples could only dream of such conditions, but Sarah still managed to imagine everything as if she lived on the outskirts, among peeling walls and drafts. I tried not to notice, not to respond, not to provoke. I understood, family relationships are a complicated thing, and any rash step can lead to a snowball of resentment, litigation, and silent wars, but the hints continued, becoming more and more open, more insistent. Sarah sighed, looking around her small world, casually commented on how great it would be to have a separate room for a nursery or a spacious kitchen for dinners with friends, and then Amerigo began to join her remarks. He, always so delicate and calm, suddenly started talking about the future, about children, about how important it is for a child to have space. And every time he said it, he looked right at me, with that expression on his face that seemed to ask, aren't you going to suggest something? But I wasn't going to suggest anything. It had taken me too long to have this house, to finally have something of my own, and I wasn't going to feel guilty for having good things. The most depressing thing was how my parents, the very ones I had helped so many times, began to support them, nodding, agreeing, throwing remarks in which a reproachful note sounded between the lines. It was as if the very fact of my solitary, independent existence had become something shameful, as if I had violated some kind of unspoken family order. They seemed to have completely forgotten that I was the one who helped them with money over the years, that I was the one who made a huge contribution to Amerigo's wedding, that I helped them out more than once in difficult moments when they needed money for car repairs, medical treatment, and tax debts, and now they were looking at me with a slight shadow of condemnation, because I wasn't ready to give up the house I'd been fighting for 13 years. It didn't make any sense. Logic crumbled under the pressure of emotions and the desire to have more than you should have, and then, 3 months after all these hints began, I noticed that something had changed in my parents' house, not in things, not in the decor, but in people. At one of the dinners, everyone behaved strangely, as if there was a secret agreement between them that I wasn't supposed to know. Mom and Dad exchanged glances with Amerigo, and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances. Smiles, and short phrases, the meaning of which eluded me, but definitely had weight. Sarah was beaming, and it wasn't her usual polite smile, but a wide, anticipatory one, as if she was about to take off and start jumping for joy, and Amerigo was touching her stomach all the time, lightly, carefully, protectively, as if he was already guarding someone who had just been born. I wasn't naive, I understood exactly what was going on. Sarah is pregnant, I thought, watching the whole pantomime. Of course, they'll talk about it over dinner. I didn't feel jealous, I was actually happy for them. Amerigo always got along well with children, he had a kind, attentive heart, and Sarah seemed like a woman who could be a good mother. It could even distract everyone from my life. From questions about marriage and children, from obsessive advice, it could become a new chapter, the center of family attention, finally shifting everyone into a different orbit. We sat down at the table as usual. Mom cooked her famous stew. The aroma of coriander, bay leaf and mint filled the house with cozy warmth, but this time, no one was in a hurry to serve food, because Amerigo cleared his throat and attracted attention. Sarah and I have some news we want to share, he said, and I already knew what he was going to say next. He took Sarah's hand, she looked at him with beaming joy, and he announced, "We're having a baby." The parents, of course, already knew. The mother immediately jumped up to hug Sarah, sobbing with happiness, and the father shook his son's hand, as if congratulating him on winning the lottery. "Congratulations," I said, and there was no pretense in those words, I really meant it. That was great news. But as soon as I allowed myself to be genuinely happy for Amerigo and Sarah, to allow warmth to grow in my chest, albeit cautiously, but real, my mother, with her innate ability to spoil the most vulnerable moment, intervened with such unexpected directness that a strange tension hung in the room, as if someone had abruptly opened the window on a frosty day. "Well, at least one of my children will give me grandchildren," she said, and her look left no doubt. Every word was addressed specifically to me. I felt the blood drain from my face, because this phrase, despite its outward innocence, carried all the weight of unfulfilled expectations, silent accusations, and the same maternal bitterness that she so often tried to hide behind cooking recipes and caring questions about my work. "I was already beginning to think that I would never have them," she added, and it was no longer just a remark, but a sentence wrapped in subtle sarcasm. I bit my tongue. It was their moment, a moment of happiness and joy, and not a stage for discussing my decisions, not an arena for arguing about how I used my life. I smiled as gently and evenly as I could, and congratulated them again, hoping that the conversation would quickly change direction, and for a moment it really changed, but only for a moment. Sarah turned to me with her polite, polished smile, in which not a drop of the former shyness remained, and said with an almost schoolboy-like forced gentleness, "Actually, Violetta, I've been talking to Amerigo and your parents about something important." I turned to her, nodding politely, unaware of the speed at which my entire inner world was about to collapse. "It's about our housing situation. We all agree that the housing in our family is distributed unfairly." At that moment, I froze. I stopped chewing, put down my fork, and looked at her in surprise, which quickly turned to alarm. "What do you mean?" I asked, although I already felt where everything was going, as this feeling rose from somewhere deep, disturbing, oppressive, and then I saw both Amerigo and my parents, absolutely calmly, as if this was not a discussion of fate, but a recipe for sauce, nodding in unison. Sarah, gaining confidence, continued, and her voice, sounding louder and louder, seemed to be heard not in the room, but in me. You live alone in this huge house with all these empty rooms, we're in the studio, and soon we'll have a baby who needs his own room. I sat there, feeling the blood pounding in my ears, but I still tried to stay calm. Okay, I said slowly, measuring my words like steps on thin ice. What does this have to do with me? And then Mom intervened. Her voice was filled with that special empathy that always preceded manipulation. Violetta, you have to act like a real sister. You need to prove your love for your brother and future nephew. I almost laughed. I asked, already anticipating the answer that made everything inside go cold. You should give your house to Amerigo and Sarah, Mom said. As if she were offering me dinner instead of giving up what I'd worked for most of my adult life. They need space more. Then you do. I stared at her, without blinking, silently, until she finally managed to say, Are you serious right now? Absolutely serious, my father intervened. With that stony expression that I remember from childhood, when he forbade me to walk after school. You will move into the studio apartment where Amerigo and Sarah currently live. We are ready to make it official. You're transferring your house to Amerigo, and we're transferring the studio to you. I looked around the table at everyone. Their faces were calm, they are serious, convincing. It was like they were considering the most reasonable and practical deal in the world, and no one understood why I hadn't agreed yet. No, it was too much. I got up from my chair. No, I said, absolutely not. I will not give up my home. Don't be so selfish, Mom snapped, and those words pierced me like needles. Selfish? Me, who pays their son's utilities every month? Me, who gave $15,000 for the wedding, who helped my parents in the most difficult moments. I worked for 13 years to afford this house, I said, my voice trembling. I've saved every penny, I deserve it. And then my father, as if he had escaped from the last century, uttered a phrase that slapped me in the face. You're just an old maid who will never get married or have children anyway. Why do you need a house like this? I froze, my hands clenched into fists. That's what my father said. My Amerigo did not remain silent either. You're greedy, Violetta, he said with a coldness I hadn't heard in his voice before. The family should help the family. Greedy? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that had nothing to do with joy. Greedy? I gave you $15,000. I'm paying for your utilities. What exactly is my greed? This is different, he said. No, it's not different. I shouted, unable to restrain myself. I'm tired of you all acting like I'm the problem. I'm tired of you loving Amerigo more than me, Mom. That's not true. Mom tried to object, but her voice was shaking and she didn't sound so confident anymore. Really? I leaned forward. Then here's the solution. Sell the studio, use this money as a down payment and buy them a house. The problem is solved. The parents looked at each other like schoolchildren caught doing something indecent. We can't afford a second mortgage, the father muttered. Then live within your means, I replied, grabbing my purse and standing up. And don't dream of taking my house away from me just because you don't want to spend your own money. I was already at the door when they called after me again. Mom, Violetta, you're funny, father, selfish, and Amerigo added his own, greedy. I stopped. She turned slowly. I'm done talking, I said, quietly, clearly. I will not give up my house, and this is final. I left them there, at the same table where we used to have breakfast before school, and drove home, to my house, the only place where I could be myself again. Entering the house, I closed the door behind me with that special feeling of relief that comes only when you return to a place that has become not just a home, but a refuge, a personal fortress built by years of work, self-discipline, and will. And, going deeper, I slowly looked around at everything I fought for, everything what I was heading for, a comfortable sofa made of thick gray fabric, for which I saved for several months, denying myself small things and reviewing budgets, a kitchen table where I have breakfast every morning when the morning sun pours through the glass doors and floods the surface with light, the bedroom where the big windows let in the morning freshness, where I learned to really get enough sleep after years of sleepless nights. It was my house, my own, and I, Violetta, earned it honestly and hard, deserving every square foot of it. and I'll be damned if I'll give it to people who think I have it unfairly, as if I myself had no right to dream of space, of security, of a simple human being, comfort. They can call me selfish as much as they want, they can reproach me, invent labels, call me an old maid, greedy or insensitive, but this house is not just walls and a roof, it is a symbol of my path, and I will not back down. I made myself a cup of strong black tea, went into the living room and sat by the window, looking out at the green backyard, where the wind rustled the grass and the shadow of an apple tree glided smoothly across the tiles, and for the first time in months I felt truly calm, as if I had said a firm no to their crazy, with a brazen plan. I broke not just a conversation, but a noose that had been imperceptibly tightening around my neck all this time. The world did not collapse, the house is still mine, I am still myself. The next morning, as soon as the hands on the alarm clock approached 7, my phone rang. It was Mom. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, Dad called. I didn't pick up the phone again, then Amerigo, then Sarah. I ignored everyone and continued my morning routine as if nothing had happened, and by the time I arrived at work, there were 12 missed calls and about 24 messages on my phone. It was only during lunch, having settled down in the break room with a sandwich, that I decided to open and read them. The first one was from Mom. Violetta, we need to talk, you're being unreasonable. Then from his father, your brother needs your help, family comes first. From Amerigo, Sarah cried all night because of what you said, you're hurting a pregnant woman. And finally, from Sarah, I thought you loved me like a sister. Apparently, I was wrong. I slowly scrolled through all these messages, feeling a dull irritation rise in my chest again, and not wanting to give them any more power over me. I deleted them all, one by one, without responding to any of them, without giving them the slightest confirmation that their blows had reached the target. They wanted to make me feel guilty, to drive doubt into me, to make me doubt myself, but I wasn't going to play their game anymore. The calls continued for the next 3 days, with the same tenacity with which the tide returns to shore, not noticing that it is no longer expected. Every time the phone rang, I already knew who it was. One of them again one of those relentless attempts to penetrate my space and exhaust me. They left voice messages, each more dramatic than the last. Violetta, this is your mother. You're destroying this family with your selfishness. Violetta, it's Dad, I'm disappointed in you. That's not how we raised you. This is Amerigo. Sarah's health is suffering from the stress you're creating. If something happens to the child, it will be on your conscience. The last message infuriated me so much that I literally froze, clutching the phone as if it was about to shatter from the strain in my hands. Now they were trying to shift the blame on me for possible pregnancy complications, hinting that my refusal to give up the house could turn into a tragedy. It wasn't just absurd, it was mean and manipulative. I showed these messages to my colleague and friend Lisa, a woman who had worked alongside me for the past 8 years and knew my family situation almost better than some of my family members. Really? She asked, scanning the message from Amerigo. Do they really think that you're ruining your pregnancy by not giving them the house? She shook her head and put down her phone. This is crazy, you know it's not your fault, right? I know, I replied, but it was nice to hear it from someone else. They wanted me to feel guilty enough to just give up, to give in, so that they wouldn't have to take responsibility for their lives. Don't you dare, Lisa said firmly, looking straight into his eyes. You worked for this house. No one has the right to deprive you of what you deserve. By the end of the week, their messages were becoming more and more creative. They started sending me articles with headlines about family loyalty, the importance of supporting relatives, and the power of forgiveness and sacrifice. Mom sent a Bible verse, love your neighbor, emphasizing that home is just a thing, and love is eternal. Dad sent a story from a supposedly real website. A woman left home and helped her sister because she knew that family was the most important thing. Under the story, he wrote, it could be you. You could be the hero of this story. I laughed out loud, sitting alone in the kitchen, because if heroism is now measured by giving up the results of one's own work for the sake of those who just ask for it the loudest, then thank you, don't. This is not heroism, this is naivety. Sarah's messages were the worst. She sent the ultrasound images with captions like, your nephew needs a room, don't you want him to have a good life? Then there's a photo of their cramped studio. Do you really want your family to live here? I wanted to reply, to remind her that she lives there for free, that I pay their bills, but I didn't. because I knew that every answer would only be a new reason to keep up the pressure. By the end of the week, the calls and messages started. I slowed down. I thought maybe they had given up, that they accepted my decision. I should have known better. That Friday, like any other working Friday, I woke up early, made coffee, checked my email on my phone even before I washed up, and, putting on my usual business suit, went to the office, not even suspecting that this day would forever be etched into my memory, not because of reports, letters, or meetings, but because of what's going to happen in my own house. Everything went as usual, but by noon I felt strange. There was a growing heaviness inside, a fever, a headache, my bones ached, as if someone had invisibly hit me from the inside, and every step, every movement became difficult. I went up to my boss, told him that I was feeling unwell, and asked for permission to leave early, to which, of course, he agreed, knowing my reputation as a person who never asks for days off unnecessarily. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I left the office, listlessly got into the car, dreaming only of getting home, taking a hot shower, crawling under a blanket and allowing myself to really relax for the first time in a long time. I turned into a familiar driveway, and the moment the wheels crossed the curb, I immediately realized something was wrong. There was a huge truck parked in front of my house with Murphy's Moving Company written on the sides, as if someone else's chapter had intruded into my story. My parents' car was parked behind the truck. My heart started beating faster, like in an anxious dream, when you don't see the threat yet, but you already know it's there. What the hell is going on? I got out of the car, took out my keys, opened the door and froze on the threshold, not believing my eyes. My parents were inside. Mom would carefully wrap my dishes in newspaper, putting them in boxes, and my father, without looking at me, would take my books, off the shelves and put them in boxes, marking each one with a bold marker. What the hell is going on here? I shouted, and my voice, hoarse with anger and surprise, echoed through the house. They flinched as if caught by a thief in the act, and, in fact, that's exactly what they were. "Oh, Violetta," Mom said, straightening up and trying to sound casual, as if it were some small matter, "we thought you were at work." "I asked you a question," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. "What are you doing at my house?" "We're just helping you move in," Mom replied, as if it were the most mundane thing, and not an invasion of private property. "Amerigo and Sarah are moving here, and you're moving into their studio." "I told you I wouldn't do that," I exclaimed, feeling my voice break. "I've told you this 10 times already." "We've all decided that you don't need that much space," my father said calmly. Not even looking up from the books, he continued methodically packing. "It's not fair that you have a house like this when they're about to have a baby." "I don't care what you decide," I almost growled. "This is my house." But they continued to act as if I wasn't there, as if I was a ghost, an inconsequential background. Mom folded my cashmere sweater carefully, as if she were cleaning up after her sick daughter. And Dad, without stopping, wrapped the family photo in bubble wrap. "Stop it," I said, coming closer. "Stop packing my things right now, Violetta. Don't complicate things," my mother said with emphasis, as if I were a moody child preventing adults from doing important things. That's when I lost my temper. I turned around, ran up the stairs to the bedroom and dialed 911. "I need to report a break-in," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "They broke into my place and they're packing my things." "Are you in danger?" the dispatcher asked. "No, but they don't leave, and they take my things without permission. We'll send someone over immediately." The police car arrived in less than 5 minutes. 2 officers came to the door, and I opened it for them, explained the situation, and pointed to my parents. They looked like they were still hoping they could get away with it. "Officer, this is our daughter," the father said. "We're just helping her move in." "Did she ask for your help?" the first officer asked. "Well, no," but he began, but the officer interrupted, turning to me. "Ma'am, did you give these people permission to be in your house?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "I told them not to touch my stuff." "I'm not moving." The police exchanged glances, then turned to the parents. "Sir, ma'am, you need to come with us." "This is ridiculous," my mother screamed. "That doesn't give you the right to enter her house without permission," the second officer said, and his voice was stern. Mom started screaming. Dad took a step to the side, swung sharply, and that was enough. They were arrested right in the middle of my living room. I stood motionless, watching them being led away, a mixture of humiliation, anger, and surprise reflected on their faces. As if they still couldn't believe that the world had suddenly stopped revolving around them. The movers, who had been standing on the sidelines all this time, looked at each other in confusion. One of them, a young guy with a tattoo on his neck, asked cautiously, "What about our things?" "Return everything to the place where you found it," I said calmly, "and send the bill to whoever hired you." When everyone had left, I was left alone in the house, sat down in the kitchen, at the very table where I had often reflected on life, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. My own parents, the people I've helped and supported for years, broke into my house, trying to physically force me out of my space because they thought they knew better what I needed, and they really thought they could just do it like that. 2 hours later, when dusk was just beginning to paint the sky in steel tones, the bell rang, and, barely glancing at the phone screen, I saw a familiar number. My mother called from the police station. Her voice, barely audible through the metallic static, sounded tired, but with that characteristic persistence that I've known since childhood. "Violetta, you need to drop these charges," she said almost in a whisper, as if it were a request, but in reality it was just another directive, an order disguised as concern. "We are your parents, we were just trying to help." "No," I replied, and in that short word I could hear the full weight of my accumulated disappointment. "I'm done with you all. You're not serious, are you?" Her voice faltered, but I remained unperturbed. "I'm completely serious," I said, and without waiting for an answer, I hung up. The next morning, I went to the police station to confirm that I was not withdrawing from the charges. I've had enough of their interference, manipulation, and substitution of care for control. I told the officer that my parents are adults who should be responsible for their actions, just like everyone else. I'm tired of being a blanket for them to wipe their feet on as soon as their own lives get out of control. Of course, they got out on bail that very evening. They had money, connections, and an impeccable background, and to be honest, I wasn't surprised. What was surprising was that none of them called me right after I left. I expected a flurry of anger, hysteria, accusations, but surprisingly, nothing. Instead, Grandma called the next morning. Her voice sounded tired, strained, as if she had to speak on behalf of the entire dynasty. "Listen, your parents are very upset," she said. "They can't believe you actually arrested them. They broke into my house." "Grandma," I said calmly, "they packed my things without permission." I know," she admitted, holding back a heavy sigh. "I told them that you were right, that they shouldn't have done that. But still, calling the police on your parents is a serious step." I was silent for a long time, and then I said softly, "What was I supposed to do? Should I politely ask them to stop stealing my stuff?" She remained silent. "I don't know," she added after a pause. "This whole situation is a complete mess, but you can't let this destroy the family." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied. "They destroyed what they were, with my own hands." Grandma sighed heavily. "Maybe you're right, but they're still your parents." I paused. Then, as if tasting my own thoughts, I asked, "Is it true? Because parents should love and support their children, these people they just want to use me." After I hung up, there was silence. No calls, no messages, no attempts to pressure, no requests, no accusations, just silence, and I lived in this silence for the next 3 days, and every day it seemed to me an increasingly valuable gift, without reproaches, without accusing eyes, without plaintive voices and manipulative letters. I finally heard myself, my thoughts became clearer, my breathing became freer, and even the air in the house seemed fresher, as if someone had opened the windows and a draft had carried away all the dirt of the past. But on the 4th morning, a letter arrived, a paper envelope with her mother's neat handwriting on thick paper, which she always kept for special occasions, as if the importance of the letter should have been indicated not by the content, but by its design. I unwrapped it, already anticipating what would be inside, and I was not mistaken. "Violetta," she wrote, "after much thought and discussion with your father and brother, we have decided to disown you. You're not our daughter anymore. Your selfish actions have shown us that you don't care about your family at all. You chose the house over your own flesh and blood. We won't contact you anymore and we don't want you to contact us." Caption, X, Mother, instead of love, Mom. I reread this letter twice, then put it on the kitchen table, next to the vase where there were fresh white lilies. I expected that now I would feel pain, anger, longing, at least something capable of tearing my chest from the inside, but instead I was enveloped in a feeling of such deep relief that I almost laughed. They thought that this letter would break me, make me cry, curse my hardness and beg for forgiveness, but all I felt was freedom, clear and cool, like the morning air after a thunderstorm, freedom from their eternal criticism, their eternal demands, their hypocritical love tied to submission. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat down in the living room and looked around my beautiful house, my house, which I earned for 13 years, my house, which I almost lost because of their greed and desire to control my life. The next few weeks were the quietest and most peaceful in recent years, perhaps in my entire adult life, because for the first time I didn't have to pretend, justify, deceive myself for the sake of imaginary harmony, because now I went to work, returned to my house, truly my own, and I spent my evenings in silence, doing exactly what I wanted, and only me, not looking back at other people's expectations, not thinking about Sunday dinners filled with sidelong glances and feigned concern, not listening to endless comments about my alleged selfishness just because I dared to live my life on my own terms. I heard something about what was happening in the family, mostly through my grandmother, with whom I sometimes spoke on the phone, and who, despite everything, maintained a friendly, if slightly embarrassed, attitude towards me. She once dropped, as if casually, that Amerigo and Sarah still live in a studio apartment. They're coping, she said, and there was no reproach or pity in her voice. The baby is due in a few months, and they are coping. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it, and then, after a short pause, I asked, "What about my parents?" She replied, "They're thinking of selling the house and studio. There is talk that they want to use the proceeds to buy 2 separate apartments, one for themselves, the other for Amerigo and Sarah." They could have done it from the very beginning, I said with unexpected calmness. Without anger, without resentment, just as a fact, because it was a fact, instead of playing out a family drama and trying to take away from me what I had earned for 13 years, they could have gone along with it, in a reasonable way. "I think they just wanted to take advantage of you," Grandma said softly, and there was an almost apologetic intonation in her voice. "They didn't think you would resist." "Well, they were wrong," I snapped, feeling warmth rise in my chest, not from anger, but from satisfaction that I had finally set the boundary. Later, I learned that my parents had indeed been hatching this plan for months, discussing, weighing, and concluding that I did not deserve my home, that a single woman without a husband and children was not entitled to space, silence, and comfort, that I should be either useful or submissive, and best of all, at the same time, they convinced themselves that I would be too soft, too desperate to save my family, to turn them down. And they were wrong about that, too. It's funny, but if they had approached me like adults, if they had explained their situation, honestly asked for help, whether it was a loan or a gift, I might have thought, because I always tried to be generous with my family, but they didn't want to ask, they wanted to take it away. They decided that they had the right to dispose of what they did not earn, because they considered my loneliness a convenient excuse for their greed, and when I didn't give in, they wanted to punish me. 6 months passed, and somehow, in passing, from a conversation with a colleague, I learned that they had indeed sold the house and studio, and bought 2 separate apartments. Amerigo and Sarah moved into a 2-room apartment, and my parents moved into a compact but modern condominium. Everyone was rumored to be happy, and it was perfect. I was happy too, not because of their satisfaction, but because everything I had built remained mine. I still lived in my beautiful house, which I had invested years, efforts, dreams, and patience in. I still had my job, my independence, and I no longer had to endure the presence of people who thought I owed them everything I had ever earned. Sometimes, on particularly quiet evenings, I found myself feeling a little sad, for those Sunday dinners, for the smell of my mother's stew, for the conversation at the round table, albeit with a touch of irritation. I missed the real, simple moments, which were few, but which still happened. But I didn't miss the endless criticism, the pressure, the looks full of doubts about my choice. I didn't miss those feelings when any of my achievements were perceived as something suspicious or dishonest. Now my life has become quieter, but it has become mine. I made my own decisions, managed my money, and lived on my own territory. No one else accused me of selfishness for my success. No one demanded that I give up what I plowed for, and in that silence, I heard an important truth. Sometimes people who say they love you really just want to hold you back, limit you, and bend you to their truth. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to get them out of your life. They thought they were teaching me a lesson when they disowned me. They thought I would come back, humbly apologize, offer a house in exchange for forgiveness, but instead, they showed me how strong I am, how much I don't need their approval to be happy. They taught me that choosing yourself is not selfishness, it's a necessity. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.